You or someone you love needs help for an addiction. Where do you turn? Foundations Recovery Network offers individualized treatment for the whole person. Our goal goes beyond short-term sobriety. We address substance abuse and co-occurring mental health issues together, providing a firm foundation for long-term recovery. The first step is often the hardest, but we're here with a free assessment, insurance information, and treatment options. Our confidential helpline is available 24/7, so call 877-714-1318 and discover the Foundations Recovery Network difference today.
Yo, what is up? Thanks for tuning in today, and thank you for your continued support of That Sober Guy Radio. This is Seth Manter, and you are listening to the new Tuesday episode of That Sober Guy. Big shout out to the homie Shane Raymer and his lovely wife, Jess, for having the faith in me to start this new show. It's a great honor, and I'm super pumped. Also, much love to the listeners that continue to ask Shane for more Seth. You've been a huge part in making this happen. And as a very regular listener and guest of That Sober Guy, I've always envisioned starting my own show, but I've always lacked the confidence to do so. And you, the listeners, have played a vital role in beginning to build my confidence and starting a whole new journey. So thank you so much. Much love for allowing me to step out of my comfort zone, and I'm super pumped on this. So I think it's super important that I do say that I'm not an addiction professional. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a recovery specialist. What I am, I'm just a regular dude that has been able to string together multiple years of sobriety. And it's my hope that by sharing what has and has not worked for me will help someone out there. So on today's episode, I plan to get into my story a little bit. For those of you that have listened to past episodes with me on it, it may be somewhat of a repeat for you. For those of you that have not, hopefully there's some new stuff. Hopefully I say one thing that may help you out there. Just kind of using this show kind of as an introduction to the new Tuesday shows. This show will run in parallel with Shane's Friday show. The hope and intent of the new Tuesday show is maybe to bring some more content, to bring some more guests out there, to kind of expand and grow the That Sober Guy podcast. So before I dig into my story, my introduction, be sure to check us out at www.thatsoberguy.com for any past episodes. There's tons of resources on there. And then also, please don't hesitate to contact us through email. If you have some comments, some questions, you want to say, hey, what's up? You want to say, fuck you. Please feel free to email us anytime. And obviously we will try and go through those and respond to you guys in a very timely manner. So you could hit me up at, my email address is Seth, that's SETH at thatsoberguy.com. Or of course you could always hit Shane up to at sobriety@thatsoberguy.com. Please help us out. Leave us a rating or review on iTunes. That helps give the show a little bit more visibility. So in search engines, when searching for sobriety podcasts, we come up. And please be honest. Be honest. If you love us, tell us you love us. If you hate us, well, maybe you ought to tell us you love us too. And last but definitely not least, if you have any questions about whether you or a loved one may help you, you can contact Foundations Recovery at 877-714-1318. Foundations has nationwide residential and outpatient treatment facilities, and they have the ability to provide a confidential assessment and review the best treatment options for you or your loved one. So alcohol has been around my life for a very long time. I always remember my parents using alcohol as a means to socialize with friends, strangers, anyone that came to the house. The first thing that they asked, could I get you something to drink? And that drink was usually an alcoholic beverage. I always had the ability to see that it gave people that ability to loosen up and to relieve stress. I didn't grow up in an abusive household. I didn't grow up in an alcoholic household by any means, but alcohol was always around. So I always kind of, had a little bit of curiosity in what it would do for me growing up as a young boy. One thing that I do remember is that I always had the feeling of less than, maybe not loved. Not to say that I wasn't loved, because I know that I was loved, but there was something inside my own head that I had created, or that my mind had created that, maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I wasn't loved. I had always lacked confidence. I had always questioned the love that was given to me. In the fifth or sixth grade, I think, is when I had my first drunk. And through that drunk, I realized that those feelings of less than, not being able to talk to a stranger or a girl, was taken away as soon as I allowed that alcohol into my body, or I consumed that alcohol. So from that point on, I was hooked. It gave me the ability to not feel. It gave me the ability to socialize. It gave me confidence, what Shane relates to or refers to as the liquid courage. The alcohol definitely did that for me. And it turned me into somebody that I wasn't. It got me out of self, took me away from shy Seth into party boy mode, for sure. My drinking most definitely started at a young age in the 5th grade, and it carried on through junior high and into high school. Always doing that for me, always taking me out of self and making me feel, like Superman, making me feel better than what my sober self felt like. So I was definitely hooked on it. It was in high school that I started realizing that maybe just the alcohol alone wasn't doing enough for me. Maybe I had built up a tolerance, but I needed more. So in high school, I was introduced to, marijuana, pot, reefer, bud, whatever the fuck you want to call it. So started smoking a lot of pot, definitely, in parallel with the copious amounts of booze that I was drinking, in an attempt to not feel, in an attempt to not have to deal with life, in an attempt to constantly feel loved or not stressed, or that I had the confidence. And as I look back now, I relate that to one thing. It was my inability to deal with unpleasant feelings about myself. I was always running from that and always searching for something that would take me out of self. And for me, drugs and alcohol did that for me. So in high school, started definitely using drugs, started out with the pot, got into using ecstasy, in social situations, and then constantly yearned for it, man. I constantly yearned for that feeling of not feeling at all. So another important point too, in conjunction with the ability or the desire to not want to feel, I often fell into the victim loop when I was sober or when I wasn't using. Especially in high school, it was always my parents' fault as to why I had so many problems. It was always someone else's fault. It was the teacher's fault that I was getting a D in the class. It was my parents' fault that I couldn't go out. It was my parents' fault that I, maybe didn't have a new pair of shoes every day. So I definitely did fall into that victim mentality when I was sober, for sure. And you mix that victim mentality up with the lack of confidence that I had, the lack of self-love, It was a recipe for disaster for sure. So in my later years of high school, as my drinking and drugging grew, as my quote unquote tolerance grew, the more for me, the better. And it was in high school that I finally realized, or maybe I didn't realize, but it was often told to me that, I was drinking more than what my homeboys were drinking, and I was partying way more. But it's kind of strange because that ability for me to, drink, and of course I didn't handle, not that I handled my liquor better than anyone else, but I did get a little bit more wild and crazy, and I brought a little bit more entertainment to the party for sure. So in my mind, I felt like Seth was someone that everyone always wanted to be around. Drunk Seth, in my mind at that time in the high school years, was definitely fun. I will say that, the intent of the alcohol and the drugs was for social situation. But as I look back on it now, it was a way for me to have to not feel some of the insecurities and feelings that I was feeling growing up as a young boy. So after high school, I joined the military, where my drinking and, obviously the drugs didn't follow. But most definitely the drinking followed me into the military. In my 4 years in the military, I was faced with a couple alcohol incidents. There was 2 opportunities that I was going to be discharged under less than honorable conditions for sure. I was assigned or required to go to my very first 45-day inpatient treatment. So this was my first attempt at rehab. And this time, it was one of those things that I went and I was required to go in order to not be discharged from the military. So I most definitely took the military up on that opportunity to avoid some real adverse consequences that could have, that would have followed me throughout my entire life. I will admit that I did not go because it was something that I wanted. I solely went because it was a way for me to get out of a serious consequence. So I did go through the entirety of the 45-day inpatient treatment. It was it was a military program. Our counselors were military members. And to be looking back on it now, it was an excellent program. It was a very intensive. There was a lot of great teachings, but I wasn't ready at that time. I wasn't ready to stop drinking. I wasn't ready to dive deep down into the Seth and into the whys of why I was drinking, what effect it had on me. I was more interested in avoiding a dishonorable discharge from the military. So after leaving rehab, I think I stayed sober for maybe 3 days. Ended up getting back up to New York from Virginia, and hid my drinking for a very long time. I separated myself from the people that I would go out and party with, in New York, and I would stay in my barracks room and I would drink. And it was at that point in time that I really realized that, maybe I did have a problem, but it didn't stop me. It still continued to take the insecurities, the lack of self-worth, the lack of self-love away from me and allowed me to become numb to any feelings that I had. So at that time, I definitely used it as a way to escape the real world. And, I was most definitely isolating. So in 2004, I exited the military with under honorable conditions. I had served my obligation, and there was no retributions from the 2 alcohol incidents that I had received from the military. My drinking up to this point, 2004, I was probably 24 years old. Very, very minimal consequences. It was more of a way for me to advert. So after leaving the military, I enrolled in some classes. some junior college classes, and I was going to live the life of party boy Seth again. That was one of the biggest reasons that I decided to end my enlistment and after my 4 years of my obligation in the military service, because I wanted to get out and I wanted to fucking party. I wanted to do drugs again. I wanted to have my life back. So I enrolled in some college courses, moved in with some old childhood friends, who I still hang out with today, and I absolutely love. But we most definitely immersed ourselves into college life, where the drinking and drugging and the aversion for me continued. So I eventually, failed out of college and realized that, maybe college life wasn't for me. It was at that point in my life that I decided that, you know what, fuck it. I'm not going to go to college. I'm just going to get a job. And the job turned into a means for me to even buy more booze. So the thought was to work more so that I could buy more booze so that I could party more. There were other plans. So this was the time that I started facing more consequences. It seemed like every other month I was finding myself locked up in the drunk tank. This is where, I got my DUI. So definitely some more consequences. I think that I was facing a couple misdemeanor charges for some vandalism, and was most definitely known at the Sac County drunk tank for sure, because I was in and out of there so much. However, with all the consequences that I was facing, it didn't slow me down. Like, I continued to drink more. I continued to push away the friends that, didn't want to party to my standards. And I really found a group of people that, that's all that I wanted. And it was at that point in time that I finally felt like a part Av, because I had found some people that were drinking. At this point in time, I had gotten into a little bit of prescriptions, started using some cocaine on a very, very, very regular basis. And, the pot smoking, the mushrooms, anything I could get my hands on, I was game for, as long as it was going to take me out of self. It was going to keep me from being conscious, so that old saying that Shane says, like, I didn't get drunk, I didn't get high, I stayed drunk, I stayed high. I definitely lived that lifestyle for a very long time. And I continue to live this lifestyle up until 2010. So, but between that time, there was a couple big things that happened in my life. For one, my older brother was involved in a motorcycle accident, and obviously my brother dealt with his own struggles and addictions and alcoholism for a very long time. He was involved in a motorcycle accident where he was completely fucking annihilated, and he almost lost his life. Because he was drunk, he was able to survive this wreck because his body was, at impact. He basically went limp. And so this accident had some life changes on my brother. He was in a coma for a very long time. And then there were some lasting effects of the motorcycle accident that, in my mind, and that came out later on down the line, is that he was fucking hammered. So my way of dealing with this was to not be by my brother's side in the hospital as he was going through the coma, but to isolate and drink and use, to take that stuff, to take what my brother and my mother and my stepfather and my father and my brother's friends were going through, to get that off of my mind. I was selfishly using so that I did not have to deal with the current situation. And then it was in a couple of years later, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I wasn't around for a lot of that. I was out isolating, fucking off, partying, and living the party boy life. So finally in 2010, I had enough. I had enough of the lifestyle. I had enough of some of the consequences that I was facing. I had enough of feeling the way that I felt. I had enough of thinking that I always had to escape self through drugs and alcohol. At this point in time, I had been with my now current wife, Melanie, for a couple months. And there had been a couple instances where I had, committed to her that I was going to stop drinking. Obviously I didn't. So, finally, it was in October of 2010 that I decided that I needed some help and that I was going to go to any extreme in order to rid myself of the desire or the need of wanting to get out of self. So I kind of self-admitted, obviously with the help of my now wife, my now lovely wife, Melanie. My mother played a little bit of a role in it too. I enrolled in Azure Acres, a 30-day inpatient treatment facility, which to this day I look at as it was the moment that saved my life. I was able to, dig into some of the reasons, some of the makings of Seth, and some of the reasons why I was or why I rolled the way that I rolled. Finished up the 30 days at Azure Acres, beautiful place, wonderful place up in Sebastopol, California, and was kind of released out into the real world. Obviously the first couple of years of that were a struggle. Was a big struggle. Definitely the first 2 years. It was a time where I needed to figure out who in the fuck I was, because I had lost self starting, early in the 5th grade all the way up until 2010. So I really had to come up with, or I had to really start rebuilding who I was. And in the process of that, I had to really take a look at the things that were important to me. So this was a time that I really had to start working on self. And I've never done that. So obviously it was a difficult time for me where, I started to dig into the teachings of Alcoholics Anonymous, some of the teachings of Narcotics Anonymous, and have much respect for those two programs because they started the path to where I am at today. So today, I have over 8 years of sobriety, but I don't look into that very much. I look at it as, the typical cliche, one day at a time, right? My most important today, sobriety is most definitely today. I wouldn't have the 8 years without the whole roundabout of today, for sure. So today, the way that I kind of roll, I've kind of adapted the thought process that, I basically don't have control of fucking anything. It's everything outside of self is outside of my control. The only thing that I can control is the way that I react to things, or the way that I respond to things. So it's really been a process of kind of washing the brain. I know I've alluded to this a couple times on the show with Shane, but it's been a process of washing the brain, creating a new way of thinking, and kind of rolling that way. So again, thanks again for tuning in today. This was the Tuesday episode of That Sober Guy Radio. On next week's show, we are going to have Melanie, my wife. We're going to kind of talk about what it was like going through treatment, what that whole process was like for her. I think it's important too that we include, not just us who struggle with addiction, but also those of us who have family members who are affected by that. Look out for that. We will be doing a regular Tuesday show to run in parallel with Shane's Friday show. Much love, respect, keep your blood clean.